People say that Mark is aloof, but he pursued me like a dog for 10 years. Even when I was pushed into the sea of fire, he did not hesitate and left behind hundreds of millions of assets to follow me. Living my life over again, I decided not to be a bad woman who keeps him hanging, but to treat him well with all my heart. Sadly, he also seemed to be reborn. Nancy, you still want to train me like a dog like you did in your last life, huh? He forced me into a corner and made me sign the divorce agreement. He said he would never want me again in this life. Absolutely not. When I was 11 years old, 5 of my fingers were broken by someone. From that time on, I vowed to become the person standing at the top of this world. Whatever the method, whatever the means. Later, I did a lot of bad things and was finally retaliated against and thrown into a sea of fire. When I was engulfed by the flames, I didn't think about anything. But a white figure came into my sight and hugged me tightly. It's Mark, my husband, the man who loves me to death and has no stain on his life except me. I thought as we turned into ashes together. If there is a next life, I will definitely treat him well with all my heart. This is a divorce agreement. Sign it. The flickering lights made my thoughts confused. The man standing opposite lowered his eyes. Hide the coldness in your eyes. Mark, don't do this. I tried to hold his hand. Veins throbbed and his hands pumped rapidly. This is the first hour and 41 minutes of my rebirth. I suddenly felt inexplicably relieved. Mark finally realized that I was a bad woman who cheated him of his money and his feelings. He doesn't want me anymore. I sat in the cake shop, looking through the thin glass. Look at the 2 swaying figures in the teaching building opposite. Mark must not know that I was secretly watching him. Look at him solving a problem for that girl, and the girl is almost rubbing against the corner of his clothes. Yes, in this life, Mark should know who is kind and who is innocent. But I still held my chin up and sent a message to the girl. Jane, how did you seduce your brother-in-law? Jane is my sister. To be precise, she is the real daughter and I am the fake one. When I was 12 years old, I was picked up by Jane's mother on a rainy day. Everyone thought it was a coincidence. Actually, it's not. So that Mother Jane could pick up the pitiful me on that rainy day. I broke one of my legs. I want wealth and glory, to be above everyone else, and never again to experience that bone-grinding humiliation. Jane was found by Jane's family when she was 16. She is always kind, innocent and pure. What I had to break my bones to get, she got without doing anything. I hate her and wonder why she doesn't have to fall into the quagmire and taste the pain. I am such a vicious and bad woman. So she suffered a lot in her previous life. Perhaps, Lynn Jane was really just like what those people described. She is a girl who is like a god, so I angered the god. The only person who loved me in this life also betrayed me. I curled up on the sofa, staring at the divorce agreement on the coffee table. Mark, are you coming back tonight? This message has been lying on the phone for 4 hours without any reply. Mark has an aloof personality and his friends always complain that he is a big piece of ice. But in my previous life I never felt that way, I felt that he was my dog. He comes when he smells my scent, always rubbing against me, and as soon as my hand is free, he wants to hold it. Don't say he doesn't reply to my messages. For every word I say, he will give me 10 reminders. But now, a message popped up, and I thought it was from him, so I hurried to see it. But it wasn't his, it was Jane's, a piece of text, and a picture. Sister, I have no intention of seducing my brother-in-law. I wanted to help my sister manage my father's business, so my brother-in-law just introduced me to some people. In the photo, the girl is standing beside him with a sweet smile. Like a perfect couple, I called Mark more than a dozen times. He didn't answer, and later he simply blocked me. In fact, what Mark understands least is the ways of the world, as he is just an academic. In my previous life, I tried to snatch some shares of my father's company from Lynn Jane. I asked him to help me win over people from pharmaceutical companies, and he did it without any complaints. I never considered that he was a professor at a prestigious university and was so noble, so why would he stoop to ask that group of people for help? I only remember one thing from my previous life. I talked about cooperation, got drunk, and called him to pick me up. The box was full of important figures. I leaned against the sofa, looking at the pale figure approaching me step by step, and called him over like I was teasing a dog. A medical professor of very high status, a man who usually never lowers his chin. I must have felt very happy when I saw him making fun of me like this in public. Everyone thought he would slam the door and leave. But what did Mark do at that time? He walked towards me step by step. Then he squatted down very naturally and held my ankles. Closed the dangling high heels. Looking up, his brow bones are like a gentle mural. The temperature drops at night, so don't catch a cold. Nancy, Nancy. He likes to call me that. But after his rebirth, he never shouted like that again. I'm a light sleeper, so I woke up when he came home. I lay there, wondering what he would do when he saw me defenseless. But no, he bypassed me and didn't even want to cover me with a blanket. I sat up and threw the divorce agreement on his back. The man paused slightly, and the lines of his back were eye-catching and beautiful. Don't smash it. If I redraft it, you won't get as much. I sat there in the dim moonlight, watching him speak calmly. There was a dark cloud hidden in his pupils, mixed with a gloomy coldness. I refused to sign and I stared at him. He seemed to think it was expected and nodded, saying, "Okay, let's sue." Mark, asshole. I rushed over to pull him, and he easily subdued me. The moonlight was crescent, and he pressed me down on the sofa. His hands were on my neck, not gentle at all. I bit his palm, but he didn't seem to feel any pain. But at a certain moment, it suddenly loosened. A gentle touch burned across my cheek. You will cry too. He left these cold and ambiguous words. Leaving me alone in the living room, I closed my eyes tightly. It seems that this way the tears will not flow out at all. Don't leave me. I made up my mind about this when I was 10 years old. Never say it again. I won't sign a divorce agreement. The next day, Mark withdrew from all cooperation with me. A large part of Joe's family's business is in the medical industry, and he is a top scholar in this field. I admit that in my previous life I married him just because it was profitable. I know he doesn't want me anymore. But when I learned that he had transferred all the projects to Jane Lynn for collaboration, there was still a dull pain in my heart for no reason. But I think this is right. In his previous life, he saw it clearly. Jane was so pure and clean, unlike me. I am used to using dirty means to achieve my goals. But his withdrawal from cooperation was equivalent to sounding a warning to his peers. Suddenly, I was isolated and helpless. I planned to try to please Mark again. Mark, are you in school? I made some food for lunch and want to send it to you. I don't dare to expect that he still has feelings for me, but I really hope that he can remember our old friendship and not be too cruel. I stared at the phone in my hand, which showed no response at all, and felt that I was extremely shameless. After such a big argument yesterday, now that it really comes down to a matter of interests, we have to beg for what we need. I planned to cook him some delicious food and send it back personally. Then I discovered a problem. I had no idea what Mark liked to eat. On the contrary, he probably knows by heart what I like and don't like to eat. After all, Professor Mark's biggest obsession in his previous life was feeding me all kinds of delicious food. I'm not that delicate, but I just like to act out in front of him. Mark, you are too hard on this side. Mark, who are you going to feed this soft noodle to? Mark, I don't like spicy food. Mark, when did you start cooking so lightly? That was the only time I made him angry. Rumo's eyes were fixed on me, and his tone was cold and serious. Nancy, do you think I will always stand by you? I lowered my head to look at his manicure and said to him, then get out. This is my answer. He really got lost. It was below zero weather and he went out without a coat. He must have been very angry. I sent him a message around early evening. Mark, I missed you. In a moment the door was opened. He suddenly hugged me in his arms, and the cold air from outside was mixed with mice. His tall nose rested against the crook of my neck, and I heard him say, "Yes, I will always stand by you." You see, for me in my previous life, training Professor Mark was easier than training a dog. The third time I cut my hand and it bled, I finally came to my senses from my memories when I stared at the unknown substance boiling in the pot. Realized that I am not a good cook. Instead, I ordered takeout from Linchuan Pavilion. Then pour it into your own thermos. Anyway, there's not much difference between the food at home and outside. I guess so. I'm sorry, sister. I didn't know you brought food for Teacher Mark. He has eaten the food I cooked. Jane stood in front of me, visibly panicked. Calling her brother-in-law, I smiled at her and saw that her little hands hidden in her sleeves clenched a little. Mark, I stood in front of the man who was eating with his head down. He ignored me, so I took the chopsticks out of his hand. The lunchbox in front of me was replaced by mine. He looked down at the dish in front of him for a moment. The dark eyes finally focused on me. Look, I handed him my hand with a band-aid on it. I got 3 cuts on myself trying to cook for you. I've been doing this for a long time, would you like to eat mine? I met his gaze, calmly. But the calmness seemed to be about to break. Finally, he sighed. Nancy, your dish is exactly the same as Linchuan Pavilion's. Did you learn it secretly from them? I pretended not to understand the sarcasm in his words. Just give up. Mark, just tell me whether you want to eat it or not. It seems that many times, when I get angry, he will soften his temper and coax me. I've gotten used to this, but I forgot that this is not me and him in the previous life. But he still lowered his head and ate the seafood porridge in front of him spoonful by spoonful. He is very well behaved, just like Mark, who would do whatever I asked him to do in my previous life. After eating, he looked at me as I bent down to clean up my lunchbox for the first time. Nancy. He called my name like a clear stream. I'm allergic to seafood. After 2 lifetimes, you still can't remember. I was startled and looked up at him. His wrist, which was already white with veins visible, had a red rash on it. Just show it to me. Will you only be happy if I torture me to death? Mark has a severe seafood allergy. It only took a few dozen minutes from the time his wrist started to turn red to the time he started coughing and finally had difficulty breathing. How could he be allowed to eat even a little seafood? The doctor said that if teacher Mark had been brought here a little later, he might have died. Sister, you don't know this? Why don't you know this? At the door of the ward, Lynn Jane looked at me with red eyes, and her voice was already tinged with tears. She likes Mark, I know. Otherwise, in my previous life, I wouldn't have even looked at Mark twice. Well, he knew that he drank it, didn't he? I argued feebly, and at that moment, the door of the ward opened. The nurse nodded and said the patient was awake. I looked through the slightly open door. Mark was sitting on the bed, looking at me. I guess he took my words of defense to heart. His eyes were so empty, there was nothing in them, not even disappointment, just a void. Jane rushed to his bedside. Teacher Mark. How are you? I followed him, but the man, who had been silent for a long time, suddenly coughed. Nancy. His voice was very low and his inky eyes stared straight at me. My heart skipped a beat and I walked towards him subconsciously. Could you please never appear in front of me again? This is Mark's request. I don't know why my reaction was bigger than his. He slammed the door of the ward with a dark face and left. Yes, I tried my best, I have no conscience, I am so bad. Then he can't stand by my side anymore? Couldn't he just stand by me no matter who I am? He wants Jane, not me. When I got home, I happened to see the doll lying on the sofa. That was the limited edition flying dragon he caught for me before we got married. He just gave it to me as an ordinary gift. I didn't know at that time that in order to catch this dragon, he ran to 5 shopping malls and emptied 4 claw machines. I was finally given this dragon in a bar. I made him drink a lot of wine that day, and the tips of his ears turned red. Dizzy from drinking, take the dragon out from behind. Nancy, he called me. Can you look at me? He hid behind the dragon and greeted me holding its paw. Can you let me stay with you? Even if. It was a very light sight hidden beside me. Throw away all the dignity of being Mark. Even as a spare tire. It turns out that when people reminisce late at night, they can really get upset. This is what I thought when I walked to the door of Mark's ward late at night. It was very quiet in the middle of the night, and the curtains were half drawn. I stood by his bed, looking down at the man who seemed uneasy even in his sleep. Mark's face is worthy of the capital that makes the girls in his college think about him day and night. He has a high nose bridge and pine-like brow bones, and is a proud and arrogant person. How come? It has been haunting me for most of my life. I subconsciously moved closer, and suddenly fell into a pair of eyes as cold as a deep pool. I don't know when the man woke up, he leaned against the head of the bed and looked at me. His eyes were so cold that I subconsciously took a half step back. You finally hate me? I sniffed, somehow, in the hazy moonlight. I would suddenly curl up the corners of my mouth and say something self-deprecating to him. Are you surprised? He said this with very clear pronunciation. Shouldn't I hate you? I felt the black edge magnified on his body. He sat up straight, looking heartbreakingly serious. You are so selfish, utilitarian, and like to use despicable means. Shouldn't I hate you, Nancy? But so what? Mark, is this the first fucking day you knew I was this kind of person? I don't know why, but I was easily aroused by him tonight. The night was dark and anxious. It was the first time that I felt uneasy in his presence. I grabbed him by the collar and I thought he was angry too because the blue veins were particularly obvious on his neck. What's wrong? You don't want me anymore? Or do you think Lynn Jane is a good person? That's why you are so affectionate with her? I tell you. Even if you divorce me, I can't give you a happy future. If you can't get it, destroy it. For someone like me who lives in a quagmire and cannot bear to see any dazzling light, it is impossible for them to reach the so-called happy ending. I bared my fangs at him familiarly, but met his clear eyes. He leaned on the bed, raised one corner of his lips, and looked at me indifferently. Nancy. When did you become so irritable, so easily provoked? You lose. I suddenly loosened my grip on his collar. Yeah, that's what I'm doing. Don't expose your weaknesses. At this moment, if I want to find a way to overcome the current difficulties, the best solution is to please the man in front of you. I was most adept at doing this in my previous life. Looking at the man who is standing in front of me at this moment, looking at me leisurely. There seemed to be something stuck in my throat and I couldn't speak. After a long while, I swallowed the words please that I was begging you to do. It changed to, okay, you wait, Mark. I can do it without you. Also, I will not lose, I don't want to lose, and it is absolutely impossible for me to lose. I walked out of the ward in high heels. Breaking off relations with Mark means giving up on his relationship. No matter how you look at it, it's a very inappropriate plan. But I don't want to bow to him. It was obviously you who gave up everything to go to hell with me in the previous life, and it was obviously you who kept holding me and wouldn't let go. You've tolerated my double dealing for so long, and I've already made up my mind to treat you well. I already consider you as family. Why? I stared at myself in the elevator mirror. Fortunately, I walked so fast that he couldn't see my red eyes. Why are you telling me now? You are awake. It's like being thrown back into the mud. Mark's departure brought about a series of chain reactions. Everything happened again just like in the previous life. Jane Lynn gradually won everyone's favor, and I became a bad woman despised by everyone. The only difference is that Mark, who had always been by my side in my previous life, is no longer here. Miss Lynn has a really good alcohol tolerance. A middle-aged, overweight man approached me, reeking of alcohol. It took me a lot of effort to suppress the urge to pour the wine on his Mediterranean head. This cooperation is very important. My dad has begun to be disappointed with me, and he intends to train Lynn Jane. Over the years, I have made too many enemies because of my desire to get promoted. And what will be the final fate of me, a helpless adopted daughter? It is possible that you will be kicked back into the original quagmire. Boss Frank joked. I brushed my hair back and the man stared at me with his eyes wide open. But whenever the topic of cooperation came up, he would naturally change the subject and take the opportunity to get me drunk. He is indeed an old fox. The discomfort from the alcohol continued to hit my brain nerves, and I squinted my eyes. I drank a glass of wine amid the cheers of the crowd, but in a trance, a neat figure suddenly came into my sight. The door of the box was pushed open. Oops, Professor Mark. You are finally here. The old man who had just looked at me with disdain and lustful eyes immediately changed his expression. This was the first time I saw Mark in 3 months. He was still like a white lotus that had just emerged from the world, as if nothing in the world could touch him in the slightest. Boss Frank, the man nodded calmly. This time, I would like to introduce one of my students to you. As soon as he finished speaking, I saw Lynn Jane timidly poking her head out from behind Mark. I finally understood what Boss Frank was hesitating about before. If his pharmaceutical company can connect with Mark, it is possible that its market value will double in the future. And if Lynn Jane appears here, Mark paved the way, needless to say, I have to give this cooperation to her. Strangely enough, Lynn Jane looked nonchalant. But every time she managed to accurately take away everything related to me. The cooperation fell through. I was afraid that if I stayed a few more seconds, I would not be able to help but spill the wine in my hand. Half was poured on Boss Frank's head, and half was poured on Mark's head. So he said hello in a pretentious manner and walked out of the box. But after walking halfway down the corridor, I felt something was wrong. My body feels so strange, like something is burning. Head heavy, body weak. What did old Ben put in my drink? The next second, I was suddenly pulled into a corner. I struggled violently, but I had no strength left. Hey, Ms. Nancy, can you just stop moving? Everyone knows that you are a discarded person. Adopted daughter, I originally had a mark, but you destroyed it. However, if you are willing to sleep with me for one night, I might give you this cooperation. The greasy voice exploded right beside my ear. This medicine is extremely powerful. My limbs were sore, so I had to do my best to make some noise. But this club is quite high-end, with good sound insulation and no one around. I could only watch as that man grinned lewdly as he tried to put his hand under my skirt. But suddenly, footsteps were heard in the corridor. I have never recognized Mark's footsteps so clearly as I did at that moment. It was at that moment that I realized. I'm so familiar with him. I tried desperately to make some noise, but the man started to hold me down. He pinched my neck and made it hard for me to breathe. For the first time, I felt physical discomfort and my tears started to fall. Bastard. I heard the man breathing threats into my ear. Finally, as the footsteps faded away, they made a somewhat inopportune noise. The footsteps stopped and came towards us. I tried desperately to break free. Shouting silently, shouting. Mark, come the fuck over here. I'm dying. But I don't know if that person was angry or what. The fingers that were pinching my throat pushed in harder. My heart was pounding, just as the footsteps were about to stop beside us. Suddenly, a timid voice of Tianchi was heard from the other end of the corridor. Teacher Mark, there are a lot of people in the room and I'm so scared being alone. Can you come and accompany me? Don't go to such a dark place. His steps suddenly stopped. My heart also fell into endless darkness. The next second, I was suddenly pulled out of the corridor with dim light. The man's screams suddenly rang in my ears. It seemed that Mark had indeed learned fighting for a few years, but I was also shocked when the man flew out. Then, fell into a not-so-warm embrace. Mark, He took off his coat and put it on me who was in dishevel. The turmoil in my body surged more than twice because of his brief contact. Inexplicably, I was particularly reluctant to let the situation continue like this, and I struggled to get off him. But he held it tightly. My throat is sweet and I can't make any sound. Gradually, more and more people came out of the box, and then I saw Lin Jane's aggrieved red eyes. The consciousness fell into a dark daze. I was awakened by the cold. The shower in the bathroom kept releasing liquid at a temperature far below my body temperature towards me. The man looked at me with his eyes downcast, and I wondered what he was thinking. Give me clothes and I'm leaving. I tried to stand up, but found my limbs were weak. When his hand touched me, it sent a shudder through me. I slammed his hand away. In fact, in my previous life, I always treated Mark like this. My temper is something that is developed through indulgence, and his indulgence of me in my previous life almost allowed me to act recklessly. The medicine that Boss Frank gave you has a very new ingredient. Are you sure you can get out? He looked down at me from the side, his expression ambiguous. My field is also drug development, and I am familiar with the after effects of this drug and how to eliminate it. And now, there is a perfect antidote standing in front of me. If it were me in my previous life, I would have wrapped myself around his waist long ago. But now, I have backed down. Suddenly, there was a slight sound of a belt being unbuckled. I shivered for a moment, and then transparent water splashed lightly. He held the back of my neck and kissed me. I felt like someone was fished out of a turbulent ocean. My mind regained a little clarity. The slap was a real one. I hit him in the face and it was tilted to the side. Mark's facial features are very aggressive and good-looking, and his eyelashes are very long. From my angle, it was still covered with fine water droplets. He laughed, like a withered flower suddenly blooming. You really just throw it away after using it. The sound of dripping water still echoed in the bathroom. I looked through the shimmering reflection at his eyes and brows which concealed countless thoughts. Mark, why did you lead Jane Lin? It's okay, if you feel pity for her in your previous life or if you really like her. Mark, as long as you have her in your heart. When you have to choose between two, don't choose me. I am not a person with a lot of emotions. I have been thinking about it for most of my life, but I still don't understand what love is. But I see everything the same, I want it all. Want the best, if he is distracted then he is garbage. I don't lack garbage. Nancy. There was a cloud in his eyes and brows, and I couldn't see through it. We have lived this life again, so you and I both know what is the best way to go. What? Is your mind telling you not to repeat the mistakes of your last life? Then just go away. I splashed water at him. He didn't hide, but just continued to look at me with those miserable eyes. Nancy. He called me, his words on his lips, dissipating his disappointment and hatred. Not that I repeat the same mistakes. It's you. He will stick to one path until the end and will never repent even if he dies. Is it right? I froze there, the panic in my heart growing little by little. The man stood up. The world outside was so dark. His shadow clung to me, his eyes and brows fell on me, and I felt confused. Don't let Boss Frank do the job next time, he's too careless. Failure to properly dispose of medication packaging. In the quiet bathroom, I listened to his every word, which struck my heart. That drug must have come from your laboratory. It's impossible for him to know the formula before the cooperation. So many people are watching me protecting you today. That's enough for you. After saying this, the man walked out of the bathroom. I was lying alone in the bathtub, half of my body submerged in darkness. He looked up and stared at the dark ceiling.
Yeah,
That's enough. There's no way I could lose. Boss Frank looks a dozen or 20 years older than me, but he's actually my college classmate. Everything today was planned by me. I was betting on whether Mark would save me in public. He saved me, which means our relationship is not that bad, and I can use him as a bargaining chip to turn things around again. I won the bet. I guess now there are many partners who want to inquire about the news and restart the cooperation with me. But why am I so scared? The way Mark looked at me when he finally left. I suddenly realized, my heart. It turns out that I would also be so confused and flustered because of his disappointment. Destruction at its root is the unremitting redemption of the soul. Why can villains in movies and TV shows live so long? Maybe they are just like me, shameless and have given up too many things. Towards the end of the year, my position was finally consolidated again. Lynn Jane messed up several collaborations in succession, and as her father, a capitalist, she finally turned her attention to me. Things should have been going in a good direction, except for what I mentioned earlier. In my past life, I went too far and made too many enemies. So after 3 consecutive social events, I was on my way home at midnight. I didn't feel surprised at all when I was taken into a white van by several men wearing baseball caps. Who asked you to kidnap me? I can offer twice as much, no, 3 times as much. Unequal negotiations are always based on pleasing the other party, so when I was pushed into the car, my mind was already racing. It's a pity that the other party was unmoved and a knife was already pointed at my neck. Tisk, it's not about money, it's about life. May I ask how I have offended you? Before I could finish my words, the knife had already penetrated my skin. I shut my mouth, and a voice processed by a voice changer sounded in my ears. Don't worry, I don't want your life. I just need you to help me with one thing. The tip of the knife traced along the blood vessels, reminding me all the time that my life was on the verge of death. You call Mark now. Ask him for the key to save the YDX2 recipe. YDX2, I remember that this anti-cancer drug will be on the market soon. It was developed by Mark. Once it is on the market, it may change the entire medical and pharmaceutical fields. Unfortunately, in my previous life, Mark and I both died on the eve of its release. I was hit by a car on the way to the press conference. He saw the wreckage of the car in flames, rushed in without a care, hugged me and was burned to death. Not Buddy. I'm just his ex-wife. Do you think I can get such an important thing? But I found it funny to hear the kidnapper's request. It is possible that they were deceived by the illusion I created. These people thought that Mark was still the Mark who came and went at my will. But only I know that if I die now, he won't even be affected at all. They said you were being held hostage. They said you were going to die. The blade that cut through my skin finally left a line of blood on my neck. The man retracted his force and instead placed the tip of the knife against my chest. I really didn't have a choice. Judging from his tone, he wasn't lying. If I don't get this key, I will definitely not survive the night. But YDX2 is probably all the hard work of Mark. That group of people wanted the formula, probably to sell it before him. If I really asked him this, it would be like ruining Mark's life. Compared with Professor Zhou's extremely bright and great future and the life of a villain like me, it is obvious that I should sacrifice myself. What a pity, I said, I am a villain. Give me the phone. I can only say that I tried my best. The man was obviously pleased with my understanding. I thought for a while before the call was connected. First of all, I should cry in the perfect tone, and then my voice should be a little trembling. I told him, Mark, I'm dying, please save me. He hated it most when I gave in to him. In this way, the probability of success is at least 30 to 40%, if not 60 to 70%. But the moment the call was connected, my mind was completely blank. Hello, I heard his voice answering softly, and it seemed like we hadn't talked on the phone for 4 months. I thought about it for a long time and thought, Nancy, aren't you the most selfish person? Nancy, do you want to give up your life? Nancy, you already owe Mark so much, so what if you owe a little more? But finally I looked up at the moon outside the window. The moonlight tonight is so beautiful. I said happy birthday, Mark. I say, you idiot, you are so damn lucky, why is today your birthday? Don't like me in your next life, idiot. I rushed towards the tip of the knife. What is the biggest failure in life? A stingy, selfish person. One day, generosity gave everything. It's so embarrassing. I tried to be a good person. If I were born in an ordinary family, I would have a father and a mother. If you haven't been kicked and pushed by this person since childhood, It's not that I don't want to be a good person. If I had lived to this day, I would not be a good person. But the definition of a good person varies from person to person. I made a company bankrupt, so its person in charge doesn't have to suffer the pain of the company's bankruptcy in the future. Am I a bad person? I am a very good person. However, I think Mark is a good person in a broad sense. After all, he has been upright in his life and has never done anything immoral. So when he got close to me, all I could think of was destroy him. Destroy him. I failed to destroy him. He was a man of integrity, totally different from me. I remember one night after we confirmed our relationship. He got up from me. I suddenly hooked my arms around his neck and we were so close to each other. His breath hit my face and his burning eyes burned into me. Will you love me even if I am a bad woman? I asked him almost pretentiously. His Adam's apple rolled slightly, and then he stared at me. The black eyes fell on me with the most sincere look and said, yes. His knuckles landed on the most sensitive part of the spine, and he bit my shoulder. Xingai, when have you not been a bad woman? So I destroyed him a long time ago, and there is no point in being dissatisfied. The world is changing, and I don't believe that there is 100% true love in this world. The only thing I was sure of was that he loved me. He managed to accomplish such a difficult thing. So if one day my broken life can have a gorgeous ending, then I reluctantly allowed him to give me the meaning of a grand curtain call. I stared at the ceiling floating up and down. Is this heaven? No way. Not because heaven looks so much like a ship's hold. But the person who fell asleep next to me. How could Mark and I die and end up in the same place? I woke up, and the person next to me glanced at me indifferently. Then he put the blanket, which had slipped a little, back on my shoulders. Where are we? On the high seas, probably close to Copenhagen. That's drifting far enough. Why am I not dead? Do you really want to die? I turned my head to look at him. His eyes were gloomy and he didn't look very well. And his eyes look a bit fierce. I raised my hand and rubbed his stubble. Are you here to rescue me again? What's the cost, Mark? Abandon the identity of medicine and hand over YDX2. You can never touch this area, and you can never set foot into domestic territory, right? I turned my head and saw the surging waves framed by the side of the ship. It was my father who ordered that group of people to kidnap me. I should have thought of it earlier. My rights are overweight, and he wants to pave the way for his biological daughter. In the end, I am still the wild dog that gets kicked at random. The sea breeze carries a faint damp smell. I leaned against him and tightened the blanket. Mark, don't you have even the slightest complaint? He stared at me. Nancy, there are many things that I can do whenever I want to do them. I have tried to take a different path in life, but that is not what I want. This world is full of rules and regulations, black and white, but I can break everything about you. In the dim cabin, he gently touched my hand. I will accompany you all my life until the end of this road. I was so obsessed with you that I hated myself, especially when you gave up your life for me. My life is already in such a mess, so what's the point of lowering myself a little for you? He asked me what I was laughing at. I feel like this world is too unfair. I look up, I have nothing, but you are the only one I have. You have everything, but you have to deal with me. I whispered in my heart, Mark, don't meet me in the next life. I rubbed his fingertips and then interlocked our fingers. In this life, let me protect you. Yesterday, my neighbor Mrs. Lily told me that she saw you wandering around the yard gate for a long time before you went home. This morning, he ran out of the door without saying a word, under the pretext of buying groceries. I think you should have known the news from the other side of the ocean. YDX2 is indeed my hard work, and I had long expected that Lynn's company would achieve unprecedented success with it. To be fair, I feel that the pain of having my hard work used by others is not as great as the pain of you not speaking to me for 11 hours. I know that you and I have completely different feelings about relationships. The man standing opposite lowered his eyes and said, so, you don't need to care whether you bring me any harm. After all, the reward you have given me with just a little help is enough. You were hiding in your room crying last night and I heard you. I felt very disgusted, mixed with heartache and regret, but I also felt a little excited in my heart. This shows that you care about me. This little bit of care has made my whole body tremble. I am so excited that I can't wait to hug you in my arms and kiss you. I suppress this morbid and crazy thought all the time. This is my mental violation of you. My sin. So, you don't need to blame yourself, no need to blame yourself. Just always do what you want to do, whether it's being flamboyant or humble. Whatever you want to do. Oh, and answer a question you always like to ask me. Why did I fall in love with you? In fact, I have said this many times. That day you were led by your father to open the door. Your brown scarf gently slips off your shoulders. I see you, there's no need for a reason to fall in love with you. Because it's you, there is never a reason.